They say that on the night of the Amavasya, new moon, dark powers are at their peak and roam in search of prey. Therefore, it's advised to be cautious and never venture out in the dark of the night. When people used to say these things, I thought of them as mere superstitions. I never believed in ghosts or the stories related to them. But that one night of Amavasya changed my thinking forever. It was when I was 17 years old during the summer. We had gone to stay at my grandmother's house in a small village in Bihar called Sita Mani. Along with me, my mother, my younger brother Nitin, and my younger sister Niti were also there. In the evening, we were all playing in the courtyard of the house when my aunt came outside with a plate of offerings. She applied turmeric markings on the walls and doors of the house. I didn't understand what was happening, so I asked my aunt, "Aunt, what are you doing? Why are you putting turmeric marks outside the house?" My grandmother, who walked with a cane, came into the courtyard and said, "Son, tonight is the night of Amavasya. The dark powers wander the village tonight. That's why everyone marks their houses with turmeric to protect themselves from them." I replied, "Grandma, you too. How can you still believe in these silly things? Nothing like this happens in the cities." She responded, "This is a village, son. These things are quite common here. Now go inside and remember, no one should step outside after sunset." At that time, I thought these people were just superstitious, but I didn't argue, so I quietly went inside. My uncle returned home early that evening, and even the children who usually played in the street until late were inside by 7 p.m. The village was eerily quiet. My cousin Veer, trying to convince me, said, "Don't take this lightly. Many villagers have seen witches, spirits, and demons roaming here on Amavasya night. Even last year, Satish Kaka saw a witch on the peepal tree outside our house. After that, he was bedridden for a whole month." I laughed and said, "Oh, I'll see this witch for myself. Will she show herself to me too?" Veer tried to warn me, but I insisted on sleeping on the roof to prove the superstition wrong. I pretended to agree with him, but when he was asleep, I quietly took a mat and sneaked up to the roof. I laid the mat and faced the street. The moonless night made the surroundings dark, but the peepal tree in front of the house was lit up by the small lamps the villagers had placed there. I stared at the tree for a long time, but saw nothing. Bored, I started playing a game on my phone. Almost an hour passed, and it was around 1:30 a.m. when I began to feel a slight chill. As I stood up to go inside, I suddenly felt someone walking past me. I turned around, but no one was there. Just then, I heard it again, someone quickly walking past me. I turned again, and though no one was visible, I sensed a presence behind me. As I looked towards the stairs, I saw a figure. The person was trying to stifle a laugh, but their sinister laughter echoed in my ears. My heart raced, and I closed my eyes in fear. When I opened them again, I saw a horrific figure, its face gruesome and its body wrapped in a torn cloth. It seemed like something pulled out of a grave. It rushed toward me like a gust of wind, and then passed right through me. Terrified, I couldn't understand what had just happened. The laughter continued, growing louder. I didn't dare to look back, but when I did, the figure was right beside me, glaring at me with a menacing look. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. Suddenly, the figure jumped off the roof, disappearing into the night. Still in shock, I heard the sound of footsteps in the street. I turned towards the peepal tree and saw a witch hanging from it, staring directly at me. She smiled eerily. At that moment, I noticed my uncle's friend, Satbir Singh, riding his bicycle back home after a late night out. As he neared the tree, I saw the witch vanish. But as Satbir reached the tree, I feared for him. When I blinked, the tree was empty and Satbir was gone. Suddenly, I heard another noise from the street. I looked again and saw the same witch, now holding a piece of flesh, running away with it in her hands. She was laughing eerily, and it seemed as though she was coming toward the house. I couldn't take it anymore and passed out from fear. Later, I heard my little sister Neeti's voice calling me. She had come upstairs to check on me, but I couldn't move. She helped me down, and we went inside where my grandmother was praying. As I entered the room, I noticed Neeti was missing. I searched for her, but found her peacefully asleep in the room with my mother. I couldn't understand what had just happened. Who had called me up? Before I could figure it out, my grandmother came and applied a tilak mark on my forehead, saying, "Something bad happened tonight. I feel that some dark force was trying to attack us, which is why I had to pray." Later that morning, I heard people crying outside. I learned that Satbir Singh had passed away that night, and his body was found hanging from the peepal tree. I couldn't shake the terror I felt. That night, I was certain that what I had seen was no illusion. After that night, I never went back to my grandmother's village on Amavasya again. Even today, whenever I visit, I can't forget the horrors I witnessed that night. The dark forces are real, and they take whoever crosses their path. The fear from that night continued to haunt me for days. It wasn't just the terrifying images of the witch or the eerie laughter that stayed with me, but the overwhelming feeling that something far beyond my understanding had occurred. Even though I had always been the one to dismiss such superstitions, the events of that Amavasya night shattered my skepticism. The days following that night were filled with unease. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me. Every little sound, every creak of the house would send shivers down my spine. My mother noticed the change in my behavior and asked me repeatedly what was bothering me. I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't bring myself to speak about it. I feared that if I spoke of it aloud, I would somehow invite more of those dark powers into my life. I didn't want to sound like a fool, especially after having ridiculed the villagers' beliefs earlier. But deep down, I knew I wasn't crazy. And what I saw that night was not some figment of my imagination. One evening, about a week after the incident, my uncle, the one who had warned me about the witch and the spirits, came to visit us. He had come to check on me, knowing that I had been acting strangely ever since that night. He was a man of few words, but he was always kind and concerned for the well-being of his family. As soon as he sat down in the living room, he looked at me with a serious expression. I could tell that he knew something was wrong. "Samir," he said, his voice low and steady, "I want to talk to you about what happened that night." I stiffened, my body instinctively recoiling at the thought of reliving the horror. But my uncle's gaze was firm, and there was something in his eyes that told me I wasn't the only one who had experienced something inexplicable. "I know you don't believe in these things, but you saw something that night, didn't you?" he asked. "You saw the witch, didn't you?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak at first. The images of that night came rushing back in vivid detail. The figure, the laughter, the horrifying face, and the way it all felt so real. My heart started to race, and I could feel the anxiety building up inside me again. "You're not alone in what you saw," my uncle continued. "Many people have witnessed things they can't explain. The villagers, they're not all superstitious. There are real forces at play here, forces that cannot be seen, but are felt by those who are sensitive to them." I didn't interrupt him. He wasn't saying anything that I hadn't already realized. I had felt it too. Something in the air that night, something oppressive and dark, like a heavy presence that surrounded me. But hearing him confirm it made me feel less alone in my experience. Some of the old villagers, like your grandmother, believe that these dark powers come out on Amavasya night. They say it's when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. The spirits, both good and evil, can cross over more easily. The ones that roam on these nights are not always friendly. my uncle said, his voice heavy with a sense of caution. He paused for a moment, perhaps trying to gauge my reaction before continuing. There are stories of people who have been taken by these forces. Some say they are never seen again. Others claim that the spirits mark their souls, leaving them with an eternal connection to the other side. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The memory of the witch laughing and running toward our house sent waves of fear through me again. I had never believed in ghosts or spirits before, but now I wasn't so sure. The witch you saw that night, my uncle said, wasn't just any spirit. She's been haunting this village for generations. Some say she was a woman who was wronged by the villagers long ago, and her spirit never found peace. Her soul, along with many others, still roams the village at night. His words made my skin crawl, but I didn't argue. I didn't know what to believe anymore. What I had seen was real, too real to ignore. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance from the people tree and avoided going out at night. But the unease never quite left me. My dreams were filled with dark figures, their faces twisted in agony, and the laughter of the witch echoed in my ears, even when I woke up. One evening, I decided to visit the village again, hoping to find some closure, some way to make sense of what had happened. I hadn't been back since that night, and the mere thought of returning to that place made my stomach churn. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed answers. As I walked through the village, the familiar sights brought back memories, but everything felt different now, darker somehow. I reached the peepal tree and my heart sank as I looked up at its twisted branches. The same eerie feeling from that night washed over me, and I felt a sudden compulsion to leave. But before I could turn away, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, at the base of the tree, I saw a figure, a woman with long, disheveled hair, her face obscured by shadows. She was standing motionless, staring at me with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. My breath caught in my throat and I froze. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. Then the figure started to move toward me, her footsteps slow and deliberate. My heart raced as I realized that I couldn't move. The closer she got, the more I could feel the weight of her presence, pressing down on me like an invisible force. She stopped just a few feet away, her gaze never leaving mine. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and vanished into the shadows of the night. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me as I collapsed onto the ground. I was trembling, my whole body shaking from fear. I had seen her again, the witch, or whatever she was. The fear that had been dormant in me erupted once more, stronger than before. This time, I knew without a doubt that the stories weren't just stories. The supernatural was real, and it was as terrifying as it was inexplicable. I rushed back to my grandmother's house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, I found my grandmother sitting in the courtyard, as if waiting for me. She looked at me with a knowing expression, as if she had been expecting me. "Did you see her?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't find the words to explain what I had just experienced. My grandmother reached out and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Son," she said, "there are things in this world that cannot be explained. We may not understand them, but they are real. And when you encounter them, it is best to accept them with respect." I sat there in silence, the weight of her words settling in. I didn't need any more explanations. The truth was now undeniable. From that day on, I never doubted the existence of dark forces, nor did I mock the village beliefs. I learned that sometimes it's better to accept the mysteries of the world rather than try to explain them away. And most importantly, I learned that some powers are best left undisturbed. That night marked a turning point in my life. I never returned to the village after that, but I carried the memory of that Amavas night with me, always. And whenever I hear people dismissing superstitions, I remember my own experience and know that some things are simply beyond comprehension. As the years passed, the unsettling memories of that night faded into the background, but they never fully left me. I moved on with my life, always carrying the weight of that encounter like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. It became one of those stories that I rarely spoke of, but whenever I did, it was with a sense of quiet reverence, respect for the unknown forces that had revealed themselves to me. To this day, I still don't fully understand what happened that night. Was it a figment of my imagination, a trick of the mind, or something far more sinister? Maybe I'll never know, but one thing is certain, that Amavasya night forever altered the way I view the world. It taught me that some mysteries are not meant to be unraveled, and some things are best left undisturbed. There are forces beyond our comprehension, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And as I sit here now, many years later, I often wonder about that witch, about the spirits that walk among us, unseen and unfathomable. Maybe they are still out there, hidden in the shadows, watching and waiting for the next soul brave enough or foolish enough to seek answers. I learned the hard way that some questions are better left unanswered. Sometimes, the only wise choice is to turn away, never to look back, and accept that some things are better left undisturbed. I hope you liked this story. If you did, please subscribe for more horror videos.